Hello from the Texas Capitol. I'm Jack Fink, and you're watching Eye on Politics on CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth. Governor Greg Abbott delivered his State of the State address. He delivered what he called his emergency items for state lawmakers to consider. Texas Democrats had a response too.
The state of our state has never been more exceptional.
From a business in San Marcos, Texas, Governor Greg Abbott gave state lawmakers his emergency items that he wants them to start work on right away. He wants to use half of the state's budget surplus of nearly $33 billion to reduce Texans' rising property tax bills.
We've all proposed using $15 billion to cut property taxes. Now we must ensure that it provides lasting property tax relief.
Another emergency item, what he called education freedom. It includes school choice and developing education savings accounts funded by taxpayers, which he says the state already does for special needs students.
We want to expand that program to provide every parent with the ability to choose the best education option for their child. Under this school choice program, all public schools will be fully funded for every student.
But education groups, Democrats, and rural Republican lawmakers still worry it will hurt school districts. Without mentioning the Uvalde tragedy last May, the governor also declared school safety as a top priority and said new laws will have teeth.
We must establish the safest standards and then use the newly created chief of school safety to mandate compliance with those standards.
The governor choked up when discussing another crisis.
I met with Texas families who have been ripped apart by fentanyl.
He wants to prosecute poisonings as murders.
We must also increase the supply of life-saving Narcan so that we can save more Texans who are ambushed by fentanyl.
In this video, the Texas Democratic Party provided a response to the governor, criticizing him for not proposing raising the age of buying an AR-style firearm from 18 to 21 and for banning most abortions.
There are challenges ahead of us this legislative session. We're not going to lie to you and say the fight will be easy.
But we can promise you, Democrats are going to fight.
While we're here at the Capitol, Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan of Beaumont spoke with us about his legislative priorities this session. We spoke with him a day before Governor Abbott delivered his State of the State address and after the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick outlined his chamber's top priorities. Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan didn't mince his words about the $3.3 million Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has agreed to pay 4 of his former top staffers to settle their whistleblower lawsuit against him. Court documents show the 4 men and others went to the FBI more than 2 years ago and made allegations of bribery against Paxton, who later fired them and called them rogue employees. In a statement, Paxton said he's settling the case in part to save taxpayer money, but Phelan disagrees taxpayers should pay.
I don't anticipate that $3.3 million being in the House budget. Mr. Paxton is going to have to come to the Texas House. He's going to appear before the Appropriations Committee and make a case to that committee as to why that is a proper use of taxpayer dollars. And then he's going to have to sell it to 76 members of the Texas House. That is his job, not mine.
Do you support it personally?
No.
Or you don't? Why not? We reached out to the Attorney General's office seeking comment but didn't receive a statement. Phelan is focused on the legislative session and how to use the state's nearly $33 billion surplus. Property tax relief is a priority, and he wants to address what he calls runaway property appraisals and the fact that the taxable value of your home can go up by as much as 10% a year.
I think we need to look at lowering that and applying it to everyone. All property owners, so everyone has the benefit of true property tax relief.
So businesses as well, besides homeowners.
Small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, landowners, timber value, you name it.
He says that would save renters money too, because right now there is no cap on how much the taxable value of apartment complexes can increase. Also this session, Phelan says the House will hold hearings into social media companies and the impact they have on children.
We're going to take big tech head on here in the Texas House.
He says when it comes to social media in Texas, there needs to be a Bill of Rights.
We know for a fact through whistleblowers that many of these social media companies know their algorithms are predatory. They know that children are addicted to their business plan and they can't put their phones down. We're seeing the mental health issues obviously show their ugly head in both public education and higher education.
Here now is some of our interview with Speaker Phelan. Well, what specific measures do you have in mind? And so you're talking about who? Facebook, you're talking about Twitter, you're talking about Instagram. Who are you talking about?
All of them.
Before we get into some of the other priorities, I did want to ask you something that made headlines last Friday, and that is that the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, has agreed to settle with 4 of his former top officials for $3.3 million. Should taxpayers have to foot the bill for that? And so do you support it personally?
No.
Or you don't? Why not?
I don't think it's proper use of taxpayer dollars.
And so let me ask you about property tax reform and property tax relief, which I think is one of the top priorities regardless of where you are at the Texas Capitol and throughout the state. One of the ideas that's mentioned is raising the home exemption from $40,000 to $70,000. Where are you on that specifically? And I know when you were re-elected Speaker, you had mentioned runaway appraisals and doing something more long-lasting. Where are you on that? So businesses as well, besides homeowners.
Small.
All right, and so you're saying that instead of raising the homestead exemption? What about renters? Do they deserve a break as well? There's a lot of talk about improving the Texas grid, making it more reliable. There are a lot of ideas out there. What ideas do you like? One thing that we have heard is that it's going to cost people more money for the reform that's going on. And have you given any thought to the idea of giving ratepayers, use some of the surplus and give it back to ratepayers in some form or fashion? I want to ask you about school choice, a very controversial topic. Where are you on this issue, and can you guarantee that school districts won't suffer if the money follows the children as opposed to the districts? Teacher pay raises, where are you on that?
Well, you know, we are at the, believe it or not, the state of Texas has more school teachers than we've ever had in the history of the state right now. And it's because a lot of districts are choosing to hire more school districts instead of increasing the pay for school teachers. So if we want to see an increase in teacher salary, we're going to have to mandate the school districts take the additional revenue that we give them and increase teacher salary. Because as of right now, many are choosing just to hire more teachers. So the money is there to raise teacher pay, in my opinion, but it's not being utilized necessarily to increase teacher salaries. The other issue is teacher retention is much more than just paying them more money. They'll tell you that they have been tasked to do far more than they ever planned to do as a teacher. And they want reforms when it comes to students that are not there to learn or there causing disruption. They're dealing with mental health issues with these children post-COVID. There's so much more that they're doing than the average teacher envisioned when they went into the profession. And maybe that's something that would be more impactful than just increasing their salary.
I've got several more questions, and I appreciate your being here. So I wanted to ask you about casino gambling, destination resorts, and legalizing sports betting. Do you agree with this? Because there's another effort to make this, to change the Texas Constitution. And what about legalizing sports betting? But if it doesn't get to the voters, it has to get to the voters, and it has to pass both chambers by a lot, by a wide margin.
Correct.
So should voters have that opportunity in your mind? The Democratic chairs of committees, fewer this time. Why are there fewer this time than 2 years ago, and does this have to do with the fact that Democrats broke quorum? Texas Speaker Dade Phelan, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you. And for the entire interview, you can go to our website, cbsdfw.com, and click on Jack Fink Interviews. Also this week, new Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas had a swearing in her district at Fair Park in Dallas. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Democratic Whip Catherine Clark spoke, as did the former longtime Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. Crockett told us that Jeffries and Clark were already scheduled to be in Dallas and agreed to come to the event. We asked Congresswoman Crockett about why this was important to hold this ceremony after her official swearing-in took place in Washington.
It was actually Leader Jeffries who told me that I needed to do an in-district swearing in. It was him and Maxine actually were the two that said, this is something that you have to do. I had never seen it, so I was unaware. So I thought it was a fantastic idea. I wanted my district to know that I'm only there because of you. This is your seat. And so I felt like they should be able to partake in this. We know that 20% of my district lives at or below poverty. They won't be in a situation to where they can come to D.C. I needed them to know that I have not forgotten them, and I carry them with me in the halls of Congress.
Senator Ted Cruz and other senators received their second classified briefing about the mysterious objects entering U.S. airspace that had to be shot down. We spoke with him about this Friday evening, along with his plans in 2024.
Glad the president moved swiftly this time.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz told me he's hoping he and other senators receive another classified briefing about the objects floating into U.S. airspace. When we spoke with him Friday evening in Grapevine, the U.S. military had announced it shot down a second mysterious object, this one over Alaska. Since then, Canada shot down another object over its Yukon territory, and the U.S. took out another object over Lake Huron near Michigan.
So we may have, I imagine we have it at a minimum, video images or pictures of what it was.
The Biden administration has said it shot down the latest two objects because they could have interfered with commercial flights. China's spy balloon was first spotted earlier this month at 60,000 feet over Montana, and President Biden said military leaders cautioned him against shooting that down over land.
The president should have acted swiftly when that Chinese spy balloon first entered U.S. airspace to shoot it down before it conducted espionage. He didn't.
Cruz tells me he's running for a third term for U.S. Senate next year. We also asked him if he's considering a run for president. State election law allows candidates to run for president or vice president and another office at the same time.
Look, my focus is on running for re-election to the Senate, and the Senate is the battleground right now. You know, you look at what's going on in Washington. I think the Biden administration, their agenda is hurting the people of Texas.
In the next few weeks, President Biden is expected to announce he's running for re-election. As for Republicans, former President Donald Trump is running again, and other prominent party leaders are reportedly considering entering the 2024 primary too. So have you ruled out a run for the White House?
I think there'll be plenty of time to discuss the 2024 presidential race. I'm running for re-election to the Senate.
And now some parts of our conversation with Senator Cruz. So today, the U.S. military shot down its second object out of the sky, and in a week. Yep. What do you know about this, and what's your level of concern?
Well, the object today, I don't know anything beyond what has been reported, which is that they shot down an unknown object that was about 40,000 feet in the air above Alaska. I'm glad the administration, I'm glad the president moved swiftly this time. I think the incident with the Chinese spy balloon, the administration did not handle well. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours in a classified briefing going through what transpired with the Chinese spy balloon, where it ended up that balloon was allowed to enter U.S. airspace and to conduct espionage to remain over U.S. airspace for over a week. And the president did not shoot it down, did not stop it from engaging in that espionage, allowed it to transverse the entire United States, and only shot it down after the mission was over, after it had collected whatever espionage it was seeking to gather, and it was hovering over sensitive military facilities with secrets that we don't want the Chinese to know, and presumably it was broadcasting the data it was collecting up to a satellite and back to Beijing. The president should have acted swiftly when that Chinese spy balloon first entered U.S. airspace to shoot it down before it conducted espionage. He didn't. One of the problems is the administration didn't even let him know it had happened until several days after it had crossed into U.S. airspace. And so I think the president delayed too long, and today the swift action is probably a result of that they didn't want to delay too long a second time.
What's going on here? I mean, we don't know where this object came from just yet, but what's going on here? I mean, is China testing us?
It certainly could be. With the object today, all I know is what's in the paper. So I'll be back in D.C. next week. I expect I'll have a classified briefing and know more. But at least what the Pentagon is saying publicly is that it was an unknown object. It was apparently about the size of a small car. So it was substantially smaller than the payload that was on the Chinese balloon. It was at 40,000 feet instead of 60,000 feet, which was the altitude the Chinese balloon was flying at. And what they are publicly saying is they don't know who owns it, they don't know what country owns it, so they don't have the same indication that we had with the Chinese balloon that we knew it came from China. I hope we'll have more clarity. It was downed in the ocean, and so they're endeavoring a salvage operation now to try to find it and figure out what it is. Presumably, before they shot it down, the pilots examined it, I would imagine. So we may have, I imagine we have at a minimum video images or pictures of what it was, and so that they may be able to ascertain what exactly it was, but as of right now, they haven't publicly informed anyone.
A lot of other issues to ask you about, but I want to get right to 2024. You've said you're running for re-election
Yes.
for the U.S. Senate. A lot of people are wondering, are you running for president as well?
Look, my focus is on running for re-election to the Senate, and the Senate is the battleground right now. You know, you look at what's going on in Washington. I think the Biden administration, their agenda is hurting the people of Texas. I think we're on the wrong track. About 70% of Americans agree we're on the wrong track. You look at the results of the last 2 years of policy, out of control spending that has produced inflation that is hammering Texans across the state. We've got crime that has skyrocketed across the country, and we've got the worst illegal immigration in the history of our country, chaos at our southern border. And my job, a job I'm very proud to hold, is to represent 30 million Texans, to go every day to Washington and fight for the safety and security of Texans, to fight for jobs. As you know, you and I have talked many times, my number one priority is jobs. Jobs, 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 because that's Texans' number one priority. People come to Texas because Texas is where the jobs are, and the way you create an environment where there are lots and lots of jobs is you limit taxes, you limit regulations, you allow small businesses to flourish and prosper. And so I am very much focused on fighting for Texans every day and fighting against these disastrous policies coming from the Biden administration.
So have you ruled out a run for the White House?
I think there'll be plenty of time to discuss the 2024 presidential race. I'm running for re-election to the Senate, and the Senate, just this week, I was named the ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, the senior Republican on the Senate Commerce Committee. The Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over about half of the United States economy. It has jurisdiction over a lot of industries that are really pivotal to the state of Texas. All of aviation, we had the first hearing examining Southwest and what happened with the winter storm that caused them to cancel 16,000 flights. We're going to be working on a reauthorization for the FAA, and there are tens of thousands of aviation jobs throughout the state of Texas. Space, where I've been the leading Republican on space for 10 years in the Senate. Space is within the Commerce Committee jurisdiction. NASA, we've got both NASA jobs and commercial space jobs that are critically important. I believe we're going to move bipartisan space legislation forward. The Coast Guard, we've seen Coast Guardsmen do incredible heroism for Texas. In Hurricane Harvey, the swimmers that went off the helicopters and pulled Texans out of harm's way were incredibly heroic. We're going to reauthorize the Coast Guard this year. And then when you look at spectrum, we've got a lot of telecom in the state of Texas. I think the single greatest regulatory opportunity we have to create a ton of new jobs is freeing up spectrum to auction off to the private sector so that you can see 5G expand, you can see telecom expand. And so I'm leading the effort, the bipartisan effort to get that done. At the same time, I'm also leading the effort to engage in oversight of big tech, of the abuse of power we've seen from big tech, whether it's censorship and silencing voices that they don't like, or abusing their monopoly power to favor their own goods and services. I think there is a lot of work to be done right now for the state of Texas on the Commerce Committee, and I'm very, very proud to be leading the Republicans on that committee.
Let's talk about the border. You mentioned it before. What is it going to take for Republicans and Democrats in Congress to pass legislation to solve the issues that we're seeing?
Well, listen, the fundamental problem is Democrats and this administration, they don't want to solve these issues. The crisis at our border is man-made. So 2 years ago, we had achieved the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. 2 years ago, it was working really, really well. So what happened? What happened to mess it up so badly? Joe Biden became president, and literally the very first week in office, he made 3 decisions. Number one, he immediately halted construction of the border wall, ordered literally workers to drop their tools where they stood. Number two, he reinstated the failed policy of catch and release, so that when people are apprehended, they're given a court date sometime in the future, they're released, and the vast majority of them are never seen again and they never come back. And number three, he pulled out of the incredibly successful Remain in Mexico agreement, an agreement that President Trump had negotiated with the government of Mexico, whereby people who crossed illegally into Mexico remained in Mexico while their asylum case was proceeding in the U.S. And Remain in Mexico was an unmitigated success. It produced the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. His first week in office, Joe Biden just tore that international agreement to bits. And what has resulted is the highest rate of illegal immigration in the history of our country. 5.5 million people have crossed illegally since Biden became president. And Jack, I spend a lot of time on the southern border. I spend a lot of time down in the Rio Grande Valley. It has never been remotely this bad. And it's, you ask, what's it going to take? It's going to take the Democrats being willing to do their job. They have caused this, and they're not willing to change. Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, I believe the House of Representatives is going to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. Why? For complete failure to do his job. But it's not just, actually, if Secretary Mayorkas did nothing, that would be better than what he's doing, because he's not just not enforcing the law, he is actively frustrating and flouting federal immigration law. His effort is trying to make illegal immigration faster and more efficient. And so what happens now, several times I've taken senators down to the southern border to see firsthand what's going on. And you go out on midnight patrol with the Border Patrol, which I've done many times. You don't have to go looking for people. Within minutes, they find you. They come up and turn themselves into you. Why? Because they know when they turn themselves into the Biden administration, that the Biden administration is going to put them on a plane or put them on a bus and send them to every city in America. And that this administration is essentially the last mile in the human trafficking network. And as a result of Joe Biden's becoming president, the trafficking cartels in Mexico are making billions from human trafficking and drug trafficking. Last year, we had over 100,000 deaths from overdoses, most of which were from Chinese fentanyl flooding across the southern border. That's the consequence of these failed policies. And what it's going to take is for the Democrats to stop giving in to the extremes in their party that want open borders, and for them to be willing to enforce the law and follow the law.
I did want to ask you one other question. I appreciate your time. And that was on the coming debt ceiling debate. And so I'm wondering, Democrats are concerned that Republicans in the House are going to force the country to go into default. And Republicans are concerned, they say, that the Democrats are going to keep spending or try to tax their way out of this. And so I'm wondering, is there any real discussion going on with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate right now that will lead to, trying to get this debt down without forcing the country into default?
So right now what we're seeing is a game of chicken on both sides. There are conversations that are starting to happen. That's encouraging. Let me start by saying we should never, ever, ever default on the debt. Period. The end. And by the way, Joe Biden could do that today. He could stand up and say, under no circumstances would the United States ever default on the debt. Why could he do that? Because even if without the debt ceiling being raised, every month the federal tax revenues that the federal government receives significantly exceed the cost of paying interest on the debt. And so Joe Biden could prioritize and say, we will not default. That would be the responsible thing to do. The person threatening default is Joe Biden. And he's doing it because the Democrats have spent at a level never seen before in the history of this country, trillions of dollars of spending. You know, when you pay your rent each month and the price is much, much higher, when you go fill up your tank, when you go check out at the grocery store and the price is 20, 30% higher, the inflation that we're seeing is because of the trillions of dollars that Democrats have spent over the last 2 years.
Well, Republicans have spent it as well.
Republicans have spent, to be sure, and Republicans spent too much, but what the Democrats did is they took it and put it on steroids. And so my view on the debt ceiling is that the Republican majority in the House should use the debt ceiling as leverage to force real and meaningful reforms to address the out-of-control spending and debt that we have. That doesn't mean solve it all with a magic wand. But history is very much on my side on this, and that if you look back and ask, okay, when has Congress ever managed to hold back from its addiction to spending? And the answer has been the most effective lever historically has been the debt ceiling. So for example, in 2010, the Budget Control Act was passed because House Republicans held the line on the debt ceiling and they said, we won't raise the debt ceiling unless we have meaningful spending restraint. And the Budget Control Act, which Barack Obama signed into law, ended up saving trillions of dollars for this country. So it was a major step forward. If you go back before that, Graham-Rudman, the most significant structural spending reform Congress has seen in 50 years. It was authored by Phil Graham, former senator from Texas. That came on the debt ceiling because Senate Republicans held the line and said, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless we do something meaningful to fix the problem. There is a pattern of success. Now, the Biden White House started off with a patently unreasonable position. They said, we're not going to negotiate, we're not willing to do anything, we just want a blank check. That wasn't reasonable. And I'm glad to say it was so unreasonable that Biden couldn't hold that line very long. So Kevin McCarthy, the new speaker, has already gone to the White House, has negotiated with President Biden. I saw Kevin this week. His report on the conversation was that it was productive, that they were starting to have a positive negotiation. I'm encouraged by that. We need to reach a resolution that does two things. Number one, does not default on the debt, period, the end. But number two, does something to rein in the out-of-control spending.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
Good to be with you. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton again made headlines last Friday when court filings showed he agreed to settle a whistleblower lawsuit with 4 of his former top officials for more than $3 million. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton says he is settling the whistleblower lawsuit filed by 4 former top officials in his office so he can put it behind him. Those 4 men and 4 other top officials in the AG's office went to the FBI nearly 3 years ago, making allegations of bribery and abuse of office against Paxton. He fired them and called them, quote, rogue employees. As part of the settlement agreement, Paxton is paying them $3.3 million. The agreement says, quote, whereas Attorney General Ken Paxton accepts that plaintiffs acted in a manner that they thought was right and apologizes for referring to them as rogue employees. And the press release that calls them rogue will be removed from the agency's website. David Cole is an attorney in Dallas who's not affiliated with this case.
This involves whistleblower allegations at the highest echelons of Texas state government. I mean, these are the people and the closest advisors that the state attorney general had.
One of the plaintiffs, Mark Penley, a former deputy attorney general for criminal justice, said in a statement, quote, I am glad that the Office of Attorney General has recognized the legitimacy of our claims and the value of the damages we sustained. As a group, our actions were not motivated by politics in any respect. Paxton has denied any wrongdoing and in a statement to CBS 11 said, quote, I have reached a settlement agreement to put this issue to rest. I have chosen this path to save taxpayer dollars and ensure my 3rd term as Attorney General is unburdened by unnecessary distractions.
If spending $3.3 million is in fact a savings of money That suggests that he was either thinking there was going to be a long period in court or a potentially larger payout that would ultimately be due at the end of the day.
No word on the status of the FBI's ongoing investigation. Paxton still faces a trial on 3 unrelated state felony fraud charges. He has pleaded not guilty and continues to deny any wrongdoing in those cases. Well, that's all for this week's edition of Eye on Politics from the Texas Capitol. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. You're watching CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth.